Morning. So it's true that we like growing and growth. Right? A lot of us, not me, have gardens and like to see those things grow that God creates for us. Even learning new skills and learning new things. Growing up, we have a lot of new parents with some kids, and there's a whole lot of firsts, in their lives right now. First, words and first steps and things like that for sure. And getting stronger, getting faster. Neither of which apply to me. But in growing, there can be some challenges, right? So when I'll use Colton for an example. He had this experience when he was a toddler. He would wake up in the middle of the night just screaming, and we'd have to go in there, and he'd be rubbing his legs, and it was growing pains, right? And some toddlers, some kids experience that. We lived in a house for a time that had very hard slate tile floors with steps that were hard tile slate as well. And so with a toddler running around and going up and down stairs, he stayed bruised a ton, growing pains. So one of the things that you may have noticed here is that our numbers here are trending upwards a little bit. We have some new faces among us. So I'd like to think about that as a group and all of us together in growing together, and maybe some warnings about that as well. And we'll look back into history to see what some things that we need to be aware of. We'll go back to the Israelites, and we'll go into Deuteronomy chapter 6. And the Israelites, and the Israelites, they came out of God brought them out of Egypt from slaves, and from knowing this history, we know what happens to them, and prophetically, Moses knew what was going to happen with the Israelites as well. And God, through Moses, gave them some warnings. So Deuteronomy chapter 6, about verse 10, he says, "Then it shall come about when the Lord your God brings you into the land which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of all good things which you did not fill, and hewn cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you eat and are satisfied, and then watch yourself that you do not forget the Lord who brought you from the land of Egypt." Then watch yourself that you do not forget the Lord who brought you from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. You shall not follow other gods, any of the gods of the peoples who surround you. For the Lord your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. Moses continues those warnings in other sections of Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 11. He says, "Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today." And then again in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 18. He says, "So that there will not be among you a man or woman or family or tribe whose heart turns away today from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of those nations, that there will not be among you a root bearing poisonous fruit and wormwood." So why was there such an admonishment, sort of this negativity in this sense? They were, after all, they were about to receive what God had been promising them: a new land, homes, everything one might dream about. Well, it's because their future was bright in that sense, physically speaking. But what was their future going to look like? Back in chapter 8, continuing on in Deuteronomy 8, he says, "Because otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied and built houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, your silver and your gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock. In the wilderness he fled you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you, and that he might test you to do good for you in the end. Otherwise you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. It shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish, like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you. So you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. So he was warning them about a day, and as we know the history, a day when they would feel like they didn't need God anymore, or convince themselves that it was through their own might and their own power that they received, that they had the land. And as history does bear out, in 1 Samuel chapter 8, they reject God as their king and ask the judge Samuel to give us a king to judge us. So if we look back from a wide view of this, you could almost say that they needed God to rescue them, but once they got what they were given, what they wanted, then poof, they didn't need God anymore, right? That they had grew and prospered in that land, they lived there, and they grew to the point where they think, well, we don't, and just more of thinking, it's more of a thought of, they just forget about God and forget about what he had done for them. But it turns out to be kind of maybe a selfish religion, if you think about it like that, right? That we use God that they were using God to get what they needed and then forget about him. And in a sense, they outgrew God, maybe. In Zechariah chapter 7, in Zechariah So the children of Israel, in the history, God does punish them. He takes away their land because they do exactly what, God had warned them not to do. So they're sent off into captivity. Out in captivity, they're worshiping God in captivity. And then when they come back, the remnant comes back into the land. In Zechariah chapter 7, about verses 5 through 7, he says, "Say to all the people of the land and to the priests, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th and 7th months, those 70 years, was it actually for me that you fasted?" And he keeps going there. When you eat and drink, did you not do it for yourselves, and do you not drink for yourselves? Are not these the words which the Lord proclaimed by the former prophets when Jerusalem was inhabited and prosperous, along with its cities around it? So was it actually during that time period that they were worshiping in captivity? The question is, when you were fasting, who were you doing it for? Who was your religious, activities and worship? Who was it actually for? So the question for us is, can that happen to us? All right? And I ask the question for myself, is it actually for God that I do what I do, that I say what I say? So when we think about, here and local congregations, we may think, look at the things that we do, that maybe that Eastside does. And, we're talking with someone or even praying prayers. We may be, indicate thankfulness to God. Our words might betray us in a sense. And, terminology that comes out that says, well, we're doing this, we're supporting this, and we're sending, this to these brethren, and we're doing this, and we're doing all of these things. Maybe something that we can think about our terminology, because in that sense, it sounds more like we're patting ourselves on the back in that type of terminology. Perhaps rather than giving God the glory for that. Because let's go back to the Israelites. Who was it that built those houses that they were living in and the vineyards that were already there? God's the one that had done all that for them. Think about it for ourselves. If we're able to help anybody and support anybody and provide help send food, who's doing that? Anything that I have, it's what God's given me. It's what's God's, and we just become this vessel or funnel, you might say, because it's just going through, it might come through our hands, but it's going to brethren, to other people and we just think about ourselves as servants, as tools that God can use for whatever He wants to accomplish and where He wants to accomplish it. So we can think about our words and our terminology, and we think, we are, and be thankful and ask God to use us as servants in whatever ways that He wants and that will further His kingdom. So let's think about growth and what growth really looks like. We see the numbers maybe trending, upward, a bit right now. But what do we define as growth versus, what and compare that to what God sees as growth. And we look back to that history again. When did God see growth in the Israelites? In a worldly viewpoint, you might say, hey, when they actually conquered and succeeded in getting that land, and they went in and they were able to live there and expand there, and take over that territory. That's growth. They're growing. But who was it that fought the battles for them and gave them that land? It wasn't anything of their own strength and might, for sure. One of the other things that God really didn't like, and this is not trying to point at this right now, but counting a census back then, God did not like that. We talked about this in our class the other night. Counting the people, God forbid that. He did it a couple of times for seemingly very, very real purposes, and had them do that. But in general, counting, God did not like that, because what does counting your armies mean? What was the purpose of that? I was to see how big you were and how big you think the other guys are, and if we can do this or not. What did that take off the table completely? That God was the one that was going to be doing this for them. It took away their dependence on God. All right? So rather than those kind of worldly viewpoints of growth, what God wanted and what God was pleased with, and we can look to the period of the Judges through this, was when the people turned to Him and they realized that the path that they were on was not godly, and they realized their dependence and they realized their need for God. So this growth was spiritual in nature, and when the hearts and minds of the people turned toward God, that's what God saw as spiritual growth, and their desire for a relationship with Him. So with us, what lessons can we learn from that? And numbers are numbers. There's some value in that for sure. But what if we instead of counting just head count, what if we made it a count of how many Bible studies are going on amongst us with non-Christians? That would be a good count. Or how many spiritual conversations that we've had with the unsaved, with those who don't know Jesus. Maybe the number of Christians who are stepping outside of our comfort zones to find ways, maybe new ways, that we can serve God and serve in His kingdom and be His servants and tools in His kingdom.
What if we, instead of counting just, head count,
one of the ways
and tools in His kingdom,
increase is we have people moving around and moving from place to place and moving into the area. And that causes a good bit of growth, and that gives a lot of a potential for us, right? Potential is just potential. It's not realized. Sometimes it can go either way, right? But Christians Christians who have moved in here and become a part of Eastside, some of them are elders here now, right? Or deacons, teachers. That's definitely a part of how our numbers change, right? And as we think about this idea of growing together, it's helpful and necessary to realize our roles as we join together, and as families come in with us, new converts come in with us. What is our roles? And God has set up exactly the methods for being guided and directed. And using biblical terms, He set up shepherds to do the shepherding for us as people, as the flock, or as the sheep. So as the shepherds are shepherding, we the sheep are sheeping. we're doing the following, right? That's our role, right? So together, do the sheep make any decisions? Do the sheep guide? They don't, do they? Now, that analogy doesn't go everywhere because there's some leadership, but in a large, high view of this, that's exactly right. We're the sheeple. we're sheep. We're following from their guidance and their direction. So now we talk about people moving in and different things. There could be some real reasons, that we get ourselves into, a group of Christians and we just can't follow, the shepherds. And there's some real reasons for that. I pray that's really rare that happens, right? And that changes are made for that reason. But when we think about, when we have confidence and we're following the shepherds and they're guiding us, then we're all working together and creating an atmosphere that we can grow and be united and serve God. So the other way that we've mentioned this of growing is with and conversions and people coming in that are now part of us who are converted. And we've had some young folks here from some good Christian homes that are joined in the path and are in the kingdom now. And when we converts that come in from different circumstances, from non-godly homes, that's more of a challenge for us to incorporate them, isn't it? They can come in with some real problems and some real issues. They're on the same path as us now, but bringing them in can be a challenge. It may take, in fact, it will. It'll take more of our time, right? To help them, to work with them as we transition younger ones from milk to meat. That takes time, that takes patience, right? So with all of these things, these are just some thoughts that I've had that, as a group, as we're together and we're growing, and I want to see us continue our walk with God and working together to avoid potential hazards that the Israelites faced when they just sort of forgot God, and they did forget God. They just decided to kind of do things their own way, and that can't happen in God's kingdom. That won't happen in God's kingdom. So, the summary, we're thinking about and looking and recognizing what growth looks like, real growth. Growth that a lot of it is really personal, isn't it? You know, turning our hearts toward God, seeing our need and our dependence on Him. And above all and everything, that we don't outgrow God, right? And that we forget Him, and that we forget what He's done for us. And together we keep reminding ourselves of God's grace and God's mercy and His love for us, and encourage each other in obedience in all things. Then one day we'll all be together and singing praises around His throne. It may be that you're here and you're ready and you want to experience and take part in this, in God's love and God's grace, and see the need for remission of sins and transgressions in your life. If that's the case today, then please come as we stand and sing.